Gabe, I'd like to thank you for having us here today. I have been looking forward to this debate for a long time. My opponent has the worst congressional record in the history of Westchester County. On the important issues to the people of Westchester County, he has not been there when you need him. He's voted to cut Medicare, drug education in our schools, drug programs, voted to cut housing programs in half in the midst of the worst housing crisis in Westchester history. He's voted to cut law enforcement, water pollution, any people program that Joe DioGuardi comes up and sees, he's going to say, how much can we possibly get away with cutting? And every single time he's going to vote to cut it. Let me tell you what the Republican county executive said about Joe DioGuardi's Graham-Rudman proposal, which he touted as the greatest thing since sliced bread. He said it would be, and I quote, a disaster for Westchester that would result in a 10% real property tax increase for every year it's in effect. Now it's going to be in effect for 5 years. That's your taxes going up 50%. Joe DioGuardi has been a disaster for the human needs of Westchester County. In addition, Joe DioGuardi is an extremist. He voted to prevent abortions, even the instance where the life of the mother is in danger. A totally irresponsible position. Joe, that may be okay for your personal beliefs, but to impose them on society is just plain wrong. He wants to overturn the Supreme Court. Joe's been ducking any confrontation with me in public till late in the campaign. I am so pleased that I finally got him here today where he can go on record and the voters of Westchester County can decide whether or not Joe DioGuardi deserves to be returned to Congress.
Pleased to be here too, Bella. Been waiting for this point for a long time. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I ran for Congress 2 years ago because I had a deep concern about what was happening in our community. My background basically was your background, many of you, working in the community, working in business, commuting to New York. Both as a professional and a community leader, I saw firsthand what was happening to this country. The fiscal insanity that we've witnessed with the budget crisis, and also what's happening to our kids. What have I done in 2 years since I've been there? I've made kids my top priority. I have 2 children. I have a son, John, who's 12, and a girl, Kara, who's 15. And I'm worried about what's happening to the country and what these kids will inherit from us. We've got to make some qualitative judgments. We've got to do some things to set an agenda to be sure that we don't injure the best legacy we have, and that's our children. Legislatively, I've made kids my top priority. We've dealt with the issue of child abuse. We now have a bill called, that was signed by the President, the Children's Justice Act. The issue of drug abuse has been very much on my mind, following up on the 7 years I spent on the board of the Phoenix House. And certainly the issue of youth suicide prevention. On the fiscal side, I've done all I can to bring my background as a certified public accountant, a businessman, a background that's so lacking today in Congress, here so that we make some sense as to what's happening in managing the resources that people commit to government, your taxes. What needs to be done? A lot. I thought this place was bad when I came here 2 years ago. I wasn't disappointed. I'm absolutely appalled at the way we manage a $1 trillion budget. You wouldn't run your home, you wouldn't run your business the way we do it here in Congress. And the waste is rampant. If we don't stop this, the biggest program we will have will be the interest on the national debt. Someone said that by 1991, without Graham-Rudman, 41 cents of every dollar would go just to pay the interest on the national debt. Where will our kids be then? Now, you've heard a lot of rhetoric here from Ms. Abzug. Frankly, she represents the kind of thinking that would make interest the biggest program this country would have. Thank you.
Okay, are we going to use any questions, Q&A?
No, wait a minute. Was that 3 minutes? I didn't hear. No one was waving at me. I didn't know where I was.
No, we were letting you run. That was about 5.
What?
Was that about 5 minutes?
No, it's almost
geez.
2.5.
See, you got to let me know what I was trying to. I thought maybe you just said you were gonna.
Right.
You went too
At
far.
30 seconds, when 30 seconds is left, I would have given you 30
Right.
seconds.
Are you going to go, who's going to play Gabe Pressman?
Now, I would have gone into the credit card routine at that point, but I thought I had over. I went on over the 3 minutes.
Why don't we all play Gabe Presley?
Okay, go ahead.
And I would hate to try Roger, they both did quite a bit. I'd like to address this question to both of you. What do you see as the number one priority, number one program for the next session of Congress? First, Mr. DioGuardi.
Okay. I think there's no doubt in my mind that the number one program in the next 2 years is how we manage $1 trillion that is given to this government by the people of the United States of America.
Spoken like a true
they do it in words. They do it in two ways. They do it by taxes that they pay, and that's approximately $800 billion, and the rest is the borrowings from the public. And it's those borrowings that concern me most, because in effect, we're raising the taxes on our kids. It's as simple as that. I think with the background that I've had 22 years working on the problems of sick municipalities like New York City, I've seen firsthand what happens when we don't manage well the resources of government. And we need to do something right away. I've already started the ball rolling. I have a bill, H.R. 4495, which would change entirely the financial management systems in the U.S. government. And frankly, I need another 2 years to get that implemented.
Ms. Abzug?
I'm appalled at the answer of my opponent. We're sitting here with a rampant arms race, which he's done nothing to cure, with homeless on the streets of Westchester County, one of the most wealthy areas in the country. We're sitting here with child care needs not taken care of. We're sitting here while my opponent votes in Congress to cut funding for women's, infants, and children's programs for pregnant mothers. And at the same time, he says, what's the major issue facing the Congress? The major issue facing the Congress is accounting systems, Joe? Now, that's the major issue facing you, and it's that lack of vision which the voters of Westchester should turn out. Look at what Joe DioGuardi wants to do to solve that budget process. He talks in great platitudes. I noticed in your opening statement, you said, what have I done in Congress? And then when you got done with that, you didn't even answer the question, because the fact is, Joe, you haven't done anything in Congress except propose that senior citizens give back their Social Security checks. That is one of the most ridiculous ideas I've heard in 20 years in politics. It's amazing that anybody could come up with that. You are obviously a fluke who will be returned back to your accounting profession, which you obviously didn't really want to leave in the first place.
Now, Gay Pressman, there's no actual time, so you can't interrupt each other.
I'm not. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Ms. Abzug, you brought up the...
Now, I wouldn't have a chance to rebut her.
Not necessarily.
No.
You gotta. This is free
No,
for all.
This is free form, and
Oh, it is
I'll
free
tell you
form.
one thing, if you get hit on Social Security, you better say, hold it, I'm not going any further.
All right, well,
till I
that's
answer
what
the
you have
Social
to-
Security
yeah.
charge.
All right,
You
so-
guys think he'd better deal with that?
This is free
A
form.
charge
basically.
accepted is a charge,
Okay, that's what I have to know. So at that point, I should have said, Bella, let's stop the nonsense. The people know what I've done for Social Security in this country, and what the people are concerned about are people like you who have one formula, and that's to shovel money at every problem. And
Shovel money at every
it's
problem,
your attitude
Joe. This
that has held
is
the
their
public
money,
hostage.
not your money. They paid their taxes into the Social Security system, thinking that when they retired, they'd have a check, not when they give back to the federal
Bella,
government. So your black ink, red ink
Bella,
mentality could be appeased.
The fact is, you cast a vote to reduce Social Security. I never did that.
Oh,
You
Joe,
have
Joe,
a record,
no.
at least with one vote, of reducing Social Security. I have never done that.
I supported a 25% increase in Social Security benefits, and when the Nixon administration, no friend to Social Security, tried to ram through a 5% increase, I opposed them. I was for 25%, Joe. And where have you been on the issue?
I have never
Wants to
voted
give
to
back
decrease
Social Security.
Social Security. In fact, I voted for the COLAs, even if inflation goes below the 3%. My record on Social Security is second to none. Certainly not second to yours, Bella.
Social
Let me ask
Security
you a
checks,
question.
you said they
Is it
should
a-
give them back.
Is it a fair statement to say, Bella, you've been part of the city of New York City. We don't want Westchester to be like New York City. Otherwise, why would we have all this flight to the suburbs? Even you're flying to the suburbs.
Well, I don't know about that. She hasn't been involved in the city government, so to speak.
Well, yeah, but she's supported every program that's cost a fortune that has created the crises in New York City.
Yeah, but I think then what happens if we start investigating specifics?
Yeah.
I think then we're getting off our beaten track.
I wouldn't do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on that.
Win on Social Security, but don't go on defense. Just state your position and, go after it. Okay, go ahead, next question.
Ms. Abzug, you brought up the question of arms control. The president just returned from Reykjavik, and he returned without an arms control agreement. And all indications are that the reason why is because he refused to give up Star Wars.
And because people like Joe DioGuardi backed him in his effort to put nuclear weapons into space. We got enough weapons to blow the world up 10 times over. We've had a ridiculous arms control race for 30 years now that has squandered hundreds of billions of dollars. And we can't even find a place to put our next missile, the MX. We don't even know where we're going to stick it. We've run out of places to put them on Earth. So what's Joe DioGuardi's solution? Well, what the hell? We'll put them in space. And then we'll
Bella,
have a nuclear arms race in space.
You were
and
one of
Joe
10
supported
representatives. You should be talking about defense. You were one of 10 representatives in 1976 that voted not to spend 1 red cent on defense.
Wrong year, Joe. It was 1971. The
It was
Vietnam War
76.
was
It
going on.
just after the Vietnam War. The record is clear.
You're incorrect. I will give you the date on it. It was in April
Stand on my
1971, and that was to cut off funds for the Vietnam War, which I'm sure you would have supported because big business supported it, and everybody knows anything big business supports they can get
To
from
make
Joe
your radical
DioGuardi.
point, you actually voted to eliminate all defense in that particular year.
If opposition to the Vietnam War is radical, I'm guilty as charged because I was radically opposed to the Vietnam War, and I'm proud of my opposition to
But
it.
you would have left this country defenseless. I would not have.
Mr. DioGuardi, do you think the president was right in sticking by Star Wars at the summit conference in Essen?
Yes, I think he was. Think about what happened this weekend. Do you think that we would be sitting there talking to the Soviets if we didn't have SDI? Think 3 years ago.
Oh.
Who thought 3 years ago we would be talking about arms reductions, that we would even be entertaining the kinds of proposals that Mr. Gorbachev has been talking about in the last year or two, and even having this mini summit, with possibly another one coming?
That's a
There is no doubt
smokescreen.
in my mind. Can you imagine our president at this point tying the hands of presidents to come? The offer was very craftily put together by the Soviets that we should not research. Imagine, not research for 10 years. You know why? They want to catch up to where we are on computers. They realize how far behind they are. We're going to trust them by not researching in 10 years when they haven't fulfilled their obligations on basic things like the Helsinki Agreement, the basic human rights that this country stands for.
Joe,
Why don't we ask for a moratorium
Joe,
for
there are
10
two
years and
people on
allow the
this
Soviet
program.
Jews
Keep
to
your
come out of
hands
the
off
Soviet
me.
Union?
There are two people on this program. Let me
The
respond
president should
to
stick
that.
to his guns. He's doing a great job.
Joe, let me respond to that, okay? First of all, you completely ducked the question. Let me ask you something. If you could trade these Star Wars weapons for the virtual elimination of nuclear weapons on Earth, I mean, if we got rid of those weapons, what would you and President Reagan be defending yourselves against? Okay, that's point one. Point two, Joe
Sheer rhetoric.
DioGuardi says that the Strategic Defense Initiative brought the Russians to the table. That is a glaring omission of historical fact. The Russians have been at the table with every single president from Franklin Delano Roosevelt right up to Ronald Reagan, and if you and others like you in your party hadn't re-escalated the arms race, they would have been sitting down with Ronald Reagan before then.
Sorry to disagree with you. They walked away from the table. We did not. And every time they came back to the table or tried to, it was with a bunch of lies and a bunch of preconditions that we could not
Hey,
fulfill.
I don't trust the Russians, Joe, but what I want to ask you is, would you trade SDI? It's supposed to protect us from their missiles, right? At the cost of $1 trillion, okay? So would you be willing to have them voluntarily get rid of our missiles, their missiles, and if we got rid of SDI, there would be nothing left to protect ourselves from, and your children and mine would be better to the tune of $1 trillion. The fact is, you've taken major corporate contributions from those PACs, those special interest defense PACs, whose lifeblood is the Strategic Defense Initiative, and the reason
Ms.
that you
Abzug,
won't
you're
oppose it is because you're
completely-
bought by the defense establishment.
Sheer nonsense, Ms. Abzug. We need a defense system that works. We are now onto a defense system that works. We know the Soviet Union is bankrupt. They can't even feed their own people. We know because they don't like their people to communicate with each other, they have not developed the computer capability we have. You are willing now to just allow them to take over our initiative by saying we will stop researching. That is sheer nonsense. In terms of the cost, we can contain the cost. We will tell the military, as we did this year, and I voted for a freeze in the military budget, we will tell them, hey, get the money for these essential programs like SDI out of the non-essential programs in your $300 billion program
Okay, one of the problems
budget.
the Soviet Union had this year was the explosion at Chernobyl. Given the proximity of the Indian Point plant to large population centers in Westchester County, do you think that the two Indian Point plants should be closed down? I'll address that to Ms. Abzug first.
No question they ought to be shut down. What you have is an outmoded technology. Those are some of the oldest nuclear reactors in the country sitting on Westchester's doorstep in Westchester County, in a place where, just look at the Tappan Zee Bridge, 9 o'clock every morning and 5 o'clock every evening. The traffic doesn't move. It just sits there. Imagine if every car in Westchester were on the road at the same point in time. You'd have a situation where nobody could move. In a meltdown, tens of thousands of people could be killed. Chernobyl was out in the middle of a cow pasture somewhere. This is no cow pasture. This is one of the most densely populated areas in the country. Where does my opponent stand? My opponent thinks that...
Well, let me say where I stand, Ms.
No,
Abzug,
I'll
because I
say,
think
well,
it's
let
an
me finish
issue-
my statement, Joe.
I
You've
think
been
the
talking
issue is clear.
for two-thirds of the time. So do I. Let me finish my statement. The question here is should we close a nuclear reactor, phase it out? He won't even come in for a phase out. The life of that thing is supposed to run out in the next 5 years. Where's Joe DioGuardi talking about where we're going to get our new energy from?
Okay,
Where has he
Congressman,
been on the major
Congressman.
issues?
I think my stand on this issue is very clear. The issue here is safety, and the issue is inexpensive energy. These plants, the Indian Point plant, has one of the safest records in the country. In fact, the prior congressman had a study done, and in that study, it was found that the chance of a fatality from Indian Point is less than 1 out of every 1,800,000 days of reactor time. Now, what that is, Mrs. Abzug, or what that says is that you could get hit by a car. The chances of you getting killed walking off the street by a car are better than from that plant in Indian Point.
Okay, let's
You
talk-
would put 8,000 people out of work in that area, number one, and you would deprive Westchester County of the energy they need, the affordable energy, and the issue here is safety. Don't use scare tactics like Chernobyl. That plant was not designed well, it was not operated well, it has no comparison to what we have here in Westchester County, and I'm
No,
proud
you're
of that
right.
operation.
Indian Point is much more comparable to 3 Mile Island, which damn near had a meltdown. Let's talk about studies, Joe. Let's talk about the
Ms.
study
Abzug,
that says
I went through that
we have
plant
no
myself.
plan-
One of the first things I did, because I was so concerned about a nuclear plant so close to our district, I requested a tour through that plant. I put those overalls on. I went into the reactor rooms and they
Joe,
were down.
I didn't realize you were a nuclear physicist. What did you possibly gain? Did
I
you look
wanted
through
to
their
see,
books?
I certainly wanted to see the kinds of backup systems that they had to get some understanding as to what was there.
let's-
And I'm convinced that the experts have looked at that plant, and I will say that that plant is still one of the safest plants
Okay,
in this
let
country.
me ask you. No, no, I want to answer. I want to answer his question.
FEMA
No.
last week presented a report that showed there's serious inadequacies in the evacuation plan. for Indian Point.
55,000 children, school children, would not be protected in the
Ms.
event of a
Abzug, would you allow
meltdown.
Mr. Pressman to
Yeah.
make his point?
Do you
You haven't
think-
changed at all in the last few years.
Do you think, in the light of the inadequacies that were pointed out by FEMA in that evacuation plan, that Governor Cuomo should do what the New York State Public Interest Research Group suggested and try to close that plant?
No, I
I'll
don't.
address that to Mr.
We have to look at the problem of evacuation. I know the county executive has made this one of his top priorities. I met with his financial emergency people in the county, Ed Nullett and Liam Murphy, and they're looking at all of this. And certainly, we've got to come up with an evacuation plan that works and that is near perfect. If we don't have it at this point, we've got to come up with it. But that's no excuse for shutting down the plant.
Okay, well, let
The
me...
issue is still safety.
Okay, let me ask you. Let's just clarify that. So you're saying that when our children go back to school tomorrow morning, 55,000 of them, in the evacuation zone, even though we have no way to get them out of there in the event that something goes wrong, because it would save a few bucks, we should still run the plant, right?
And what are you saying? To shut the plant down? So
Oh,
we
you're
turn
damn
off-
right that's
we
what I'm
turn-
saying.
we turn the switch off of
55,000
Westchester
children,
County?
we're going to let them die because you want to save a
Ms.
few
Abzug,
bucks?
you are
That's
putting scare
ridiculous.
tactics. You are absolutely desperate.
Nuclear energy
I mean,
is scary.
Let me break in. We've been speaking of children now. In 1984, when you first ran for Congress, Mr. DioGuardi, you said that we shouldn't have, we said something about abortion, we shouldn't have that because, after all, black women like to have children, it's one of their biggest joys in life.
No, he said it gets
Completely
them
out of
another
context.
check. Another check. You left that part out.
Ms. Abzug, would you let Mr. Pressman ask the question? Completely out of context, Gabe.
Do you support the Supreme Court decision that allows a woman to have abortion, one that's been on the books for now almost a decade and a half? Do you support, or would you, as a congressman, vote for repeal of that right in the form of a constitutional amendment?
Let me give you my views on abortion. I think they're clear, but I'll state them as succinctly as I can. I think abortion is wrong.
That's
I think
fine
that-
for you, Joe.
Ms. Abzug, may I please make my point? I think that the federal funding of abortion is wrong. I think that the issue really is education. There's no doubt that we have a crisis in society today. There are many unwanted pregnancies, many teenage pregnancies. We've got to deal with this crisis. I have supported, as much as I can, legislatively and in other ways, programs to educate our children and to make funds, federal funds available through Title X and other programs so that we can prevent these unwanted pregnancies, because I believe that is the issue in society today, that we have to prevent these unwanted pregnancies through education and other ways. Planned Parenthood, I think, deserves that kind of support. I did not take the right to life line. I don't believe one-issue parties do anything to add any substance to the debate. And basically, that's my stand.
Ms. Abzug?
Well, 2 points. First of all, Joe, if you don't think third-party candidates add any substance to debate, why are you insisting that we have the right to life candidate at all of ours? But the main point here is, let's talk about Joe DioGuardi's record on abortion. He didn't mention any of his votes. Let me refresh them for you, Joe. You voted to cut off funding for abortion even in the instance where the life of the mother is in danger.
Sheer nonsense.
Joe DioGuardi, Joe, I let you finish your remarks. Please let me finish mine. Joe DioGuardi is such an extreme right-wing radical on this issue that it amazes me. He's voted to cut off funding for abortion where the life of the mother is in danger. He's done everything to restrict the rights of people to have an abortion. Joe, that's my right. You have no right to tell me what I can do with my body, and that's exactly what you want to do. You want typical male chauvinist position that they dominate the world and they should decide what's right and what's wrong. You have no right to tell me what to do. The Supreme Court says that's a constitutional prerogative of mine to decide whether or not I want to have an abortion,
Bella.
whether my children
Bella,
do.
if
What
you
want
are
to
so
do is
concerned-
Hold a second. Let me ask you a
and you
question.
voted to cut family
If you
planning
are
funds
so
when you voted for
concerned-
Graham Rudman.
Hold a second. In New York City recently, it was revealed that a score of high schools are distributing contraceptives to the high school students. Ms. Abzug,
Gabe, I'm not even going to get into New York City's high school programs. I don't care about New York City. I'm running for Congress in Westchester. I'm going to finish my previous remarks. For Joe DioGuardi, life begins at conception and ends at birth. He votes against any funding for women's, infants, and children's program, any pregnancy funding. He voted to cut family planning money, but what did he do? He votes to cut off your right to have an abortion even if your life is in danger. If Joe DioGuardi had his way, we'd be back to the back alley butcher abortions because of his personal beliefs. Joe, your personal beliefs are fine, but you got no
Ms.
right to
Abzug,
impose them on society, none
Are you through with your
whatsoever.
inflammatory comments?
Joe, do you
and nonsense?
disagree with me that,
If you
that
were so
oppose
concerned
abortion?
about people, what were you doing legalizing marijuana back in 1974?
Oh, Joe,
You're concerned
that's-
for kids. I mean, I'm called a radical by you of all people.
Let me ask you, Joe. In
1974, you voted 3 times to legalize marijuana and once to decriminalize.
Joe, those bills never came up for
Bella,
a vote. You're constantly twisting the
you
fact. But
just
let me
you
ask
were in
you.
the press
let
explaining
me
in a
ask-
way that Ed Koch twisted your arm. Your arm must have been black and blue 4 times you voted to do that. And you said, as an
Even your
incredible
own campaign
defense,
manager doesn't say it's
Bella,
4 times and
Bella,
doesn't say
Bella,
it's
as
voted.
incredible defense, you didn't want to send kids to jail for smoking 1 joint. 1 joint? Nonsense. Your bill said 3 ounces of marijuana could be sold,
wasn't-
even in public places. Do you know what 3 ounces is? 84 grams. That's a pretty big bag of dried grass.
Joe,
You can intoxicate a lot of kids
Joe, you're
if you
not
were so
debating
concerned.
Joe, would you please allow the other people to talk on this show? You're not debating
talking.
Ed Koch. If you want to talk to Ed Koch about his bills, feel free. Go right ahead. But do you know that when that came up, if your daughter, who you care so much about, was caught with 1 joint in public, under Nelson Rockefeller's medieval laws, she could have been sent to jail for 8 years? 8 years, Joe? Do you think that was fair? We had a problem.
Bella,
I don't
stop
think...
scaring the audience, because you know damn well that that extreme example does not characterize what was happening in those days.
In
You would have allowed
1973
a 3-ounce bag in everybody's home, and it could have been replenished just like the gas in your tank. Can you imagine kids walking around the house today? We have enough problems with alcohol,
Joe,
cigarette smoking,
Joe.
basic things like that. Here we now have a 3-ounce bag of marijuana in front of every kid
Joe.
because the parents can use it. Now, what do you think the kids
No,
are going to
Joe,
do?
let me respond to that.
And that's what's wrong with society.
Joe, let me
People
respond
like
to
you.
that. Joe, you're screaming incessantly. In 1973,
I'm screaming.
a young man, 18 years of age, was caught in his high school with a joint of marijuana in his cigarette pack. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. 25 years to life,
that
and
to
he's
me-
in prison today in Texas.
Well-
13 years later. Do you support
Bella,
that?
Bella, it's
Why
it's
did you
obvious.
vote to cut drug
it's
funding on
obvious
5
if
separate
that were the
occasions?
case, the judicial system is not working. And I know the judicial
And I
system is
wanted
not
to
working.
change it.
And that's got to be changed too. But that doesn't mean because something's not working, you then legalize the very thing that would probably poison the kids in our society. Now,
Joe,
if you're so
Joe.
concerned about people, think about what you were just about to do to a whole generation of kids. Make them into zombies. A de minimis rule of 3 ounces. What is your de minimis rule for crack?
Oh, Joe, now there you go again. I believe that crack dealers ought to be locked up and ought to be locked up for a long time. I have never voted to
Well, at
cut
least we agree
drug
on something.
funding. I have never voted to cut drug funding. You sit here and pontificate about your great experience on the drug issue, but you voted on 6 separate occasions to cut the drug program. Just last week you voted
Nonsense.
to eliminate it.
I
in
voted
its
for the
entirety.
$2.1 billion omnibus drug bill. How could you sit there and lie to these people?
Because you then voted against funding it.
Hold it. Do you favor or support, simple yes or no, use of the armed forces to interdict the drugs coming into the United States?
I would
Yes or
favor
no?
using
Yes or
them.
no?
No, I'm sorry,
or
Mr.
no?
Pressman. I'm allowed to speak my own mind.
It's a
I would
simple
favor.
question. If I were you, I'd answer it honestly, yes or no.
Why don't you tell him to shut up? He's doing all the talking.
It's obvious she hasn't got a yes or no answer.
No,
She's trying to think
I
of an
will
answer.
support them at our borders, but I would not support using them overseas in Bolivia. I
Even
don't
if they're
support.
invited in by the government, as we were in Bolivia?
The last time we were invited
Bolivia-
in by a government, we wound up fighting in Vietnam for 15
Oh,
years.
this is hardly that kind of a situation. Here's a government that can't deal with a drug problem asking us for help. Shows you how radical your thinking is.
Ask him a yes or
A
no
common
question
sense-
now, Gabe. Go ahead, Gabe.
Yes or no, do you favor use of our armed forces to interdict the importation?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mr. DioGuardi, yes or no? Do you favor the development of a naval nuclear port in Staten Island, yes or no?
Yes.
Of course he does.
Ms. Abzug, yes or no?
No, I do not support anything that would endanger Westchester County like a nuclear
Okay,
port.
number one issue in Westchester County is probably housing. Ms. Abzug, how would you propose that the supply of affordable housing be increased in Westchester County?
Well, I'll tell you, we have federal programs for that my opponent voted to cut in half. A typical reaction, Joe, you
Sheer
talk about
nonsense.
your children.
I voted against doubling, not to eliminate.
Gabe, didn't you just ask me a question?
Yes.
Okay, I thought so. Okay, when we look at housing
Just
in
want to be sure that
Westchester
people know I'm
County,
still here.
no worry about that, Joe, believe me. When we voted for housing, when we look at Westchester County, we're going to have a county in 5 years where only the very rich and the very poor can afford to live. You talk about your children, Joe. Maybe your children will inherit the vast amount of wealth you've managed to accumulate by voting for your own special interest on oil and gas while you're in Congress. But my children probably won't, and they'll never be able to afford to live in Westchester County. Your children probably won't be able to afford it.
How would you
And
know?
you
You just
voted to
moved back
cut
here.
housing programs.
Mr. DioGuardi?
There's no doubt that the
Affordable housing program.
issue of affordable housing is a great concern. I voted for 5,000 new units of low-income housing for Westchester County. So anything that you've just heard is sheer nonsense.
Cut from
Not only-
10,000 to 5,000.
Not only have I voted for that in generic terms, I was able to bring to Westchester County 202 senior citizens housing for Mamaroneck and for Yonkers, 2 years in a row. The 202 Mamaroneck program was in great jeopardy, and through our offices, we managed to keep that one on track, and just last week, we announced that for Mamaroneck. This week, we'll be announcing $900,000 of vouchers and Section 8 units for Westchester County. When I first got to Congress, I understood the problem of the younger working couples not being able to afford houses, where they're going to get the money, and came up with a plan called the First-Time Homebuyers Plan to use their tax-free IRA accounts now instead of waiting until they retired at age 59.
Where's
so
that
they
plan
can do
gone,
that.
Joe? I
That
never heard
plan
of it.
is one that is going to be considered in the next term. But at least it was a good idea. We had the tax reform bill to deal with. The issue is, I'm trying to do my best to provide the wherewithal for affordable housing in Westchester County. I've voted in a generic
Against
way
the
to
entire housing program.
freeze the defense,
Gabe, I'm going to
freeze the
interrupt
defense
him if
budget
you're going to keep
and to
allowing
freeze the
him to
domestic
talk
budget.
for 4 times as long as I
Never
have.
to eliminate the housing program.
On December
Any of
11
that is
on-
sheer nonsense,
on-
and my record
on-
speaks for
on
itself.
December-
5,000 units of
on December-
5,000 units of low-income housing.
He's lying, and I want to
I
point
would-
that out. On December
30
11th,
seconds.
1986.
Answer to this question,
Lying.
okay? I'm gonna give
The
question
dog should be
to-
barking every time you talk.
I wanna add-
Running out of time.
Mr. DioGuardi, your question is, what effect will
Can I have some
Mario
fresh coffee,
Cuomo's-
decaf?
What effect will Mario Cuomo's campaign have on your chances for reelection? And my question to you, Ms. Abzug, is what effect will Senator
30
Zermano's
seconds.
campaign have on your chances of winning election in Westchester County? Mr. DioGuardi first.
Well, I believe that Mario Cuomo's campaign will have no effect on my election in Westchester County. Westchester voters have demonstrated their independence in thinking when it comes to voting for their elected officials, certainly Congress. And I could say that Andy O'Rourke will do a good job attracting the voters out in Westchester County because he's been a very good county executive. And I think that the bottom line in Westchester County is that they will go for someone who is an independent, common-sense thinker, not a radical like Bella Abzug.
Okay. On December 11th, 1986, Congressional Quarterly Roll Call number 381, to authorize the entire federal housing program. Joe DioGuardi voted no. Voted to eliminate the entire federal housing program.
That is not the question.
The
I did not
issue
vote
here-
to eliminate.
Joe, I gave you your 30 seconds.
But I
Please
can't let
be
you get away
quiet.
with lies, Miss Abzug. The people are entitled to the truth.
DioGuardi, could you let Mr.
Joe, this is not a big mouth contest. It's
If
a
we were
debate.
playing your commercial, the dogs would be barking all through this interview.
The final analysis is that Joe DioGuardi has voted to cut human needs for Westchester and give them to defense. And that's why you should vote for me and not Joe DioGuardi on November
Let's
4th.
go to,
Okay.
we got closing,
Closing.
closing statements, who goes first?
I went first to open, so go ahead.
What's the, how much time do you have on
Just-
this?
2 minutes.
2 minutes? Well, it's obvious from the dialogue, ladies and gentlemen, that the choice has never been clearer for Westchester County. Basically, I would characterize myself as someone who came to Congress as a businessman, as a community leader, to do what I can to bring common sense, independent thinking to a very complex, confusing process. Bella Abzug, she's a professional politician who came here looking for another district to run in. The issues are clear: drugs, Social Security, fiscal responsibility, Westchester residency, and the fact who is the moderate and who is the radical. I think that's obvious just by the tone of her comments, who is the kind of moderate individual that should be representing Westchester County. I think that the best representation for this county now and in the long run is someone who will represent Westchester with independence of thought. And I think I've demonstrated that. When the president was right, I voted with him. When he was wrong, I voted against him. It's that kind of independence, I think, that Westchester deserves, that I will carry on in my next term. Thank you very much.
You took 1 minute, Joe.
Okay.
Only 1 minute?
Now, I didn't interrupt
Really,
you.
only took one.
Let me go, okay?
I didn't.
Yeah. Joe, I didn't interrupt you. Are you going to promise not to interrupt me like you've been doing throughout the entire program? The question here is clear. Joe DioGuardi says he's a moderate. I say he's an extremist. Would a moderate vote to cut off funding for abortion in the instance where the life of the mother is in danger? Would a moderate suggest that our senior citizens and our needy give back their Social Security checks? Would a moderate, in the face of the worst housing crisis in Westchester history, vote to eliminate the entire federal housing program? Would a moderate vote to cut Medicare for
Sheer
our elderly?
nonsense.
Joe, please don't interrupt. You know,
Can't let you get away with those lies, Bob.
would a moderate vote to cut water pollution funding by $6 billion? Would a moderate vote to cut commuter transportation, education, and child care? The answer is obviously no. Let's look at effectiveness. Joe DioGuardi in
moderate
Congress.
legalize marijuana.
Joe DioGuardi in Congress is someone who says the major issue facing this nation today, the major issue facing the nation today is the accounting systems of the federal government. Such a narrow mind, it's amazing that he got elected, even in the midst of the Reagan landslide. I was voted the third most influential member of Congress. Let's look at what I did. I sponsored the expansion of Social Security and Medicare. I got the first legislation banning credit discrimination and mortgage discrimination against women, the first child care legislation, the first reproductive rights legislation. I single-handedly made the Arab boycott of Israel collapse. I brought $6 billion in environmental monies to New York State for clean jobs. I sponsored the first Transportation Act to bring the federal government into helping Westchester residents get to New York City. I led the fight against the Vietnam War in Congress. I am better known in Joe DioGuardi's district 10 years after I left office than Joe is, which is an indication that he's
Better
been
known as a radical, by the
been
way.
a do-nothing Congress who we can now see today is also abusive and doesn't know how to
Gabe,
conduct himself in public.
May I reclaim my time, Gabe? I didn't know we just had 1 minute.
No, we had our
All right,
closing
let's take
statement.
it as if you were going last. Give him
Right.
one chance to end it here. And here, stay calm, low-key, come in under her, common sense. Just take it like you haven't given your closing statement.
I'm about to.
Because the trick is to
Okay.
get you up to speed, so go ahead.
Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, the choice has never been clearer for Westchester County. You've heard the comments of Bella Abzug, where she has the nerve to characterize me as someone who might be radical or non-moderate, when she has demonstrated in every way and form that she is the radical. She's a professional politician who's decided to move to Westchester County so that she can run in another race.
And Joe's
basically.
an amateur.
And I think that it's clear, no one has to even argue that point. The motives are clear, Ms. Abzug, as to why you came to Westchester County.
To give it
This
good
is your last
representation.
hurrah. I believe that my record speaks for itself. I've made children.
I'm counting
and
on
fiscal sanity, the hallmarks of my incumbency for 2 years. A lot more has to be done. But I'm very concerned about those children that you would have made into zombies had you had your way.
I'm not going to let
had
you
you
get
had
away
your
with
way
these
in-
lies,
in-
Joe.
in
I
legalizing
never, I never
marijuana.
supported the
But I think it's
legalization of
important-
marijuana. Not once in my entire public life
record
have I
speaks
done
for
so.
itself, Bella.
It does, and you're lying. You're lying.
You'll have to stand
the
on that record.
congressman is lying.
I think the point is that the representation Westchester deserves is someone who is moderate, someone who's concerned about our kids, someone who's lived here for 29 years, who's lived in New Rochelle for 20, who has worked as a community leader, who has been on the boards of the civic, charitable, and cultural organizations, the lifeline of the grassroots movements in this country, someone who could take that experience and experience as a professional, a certified public accountant who understands what's wrong in government today, the mismanagement, to Congress so that we can represent Westchester County and represent this country to be sure that we give to our children the legacy that we inherited from our parents. Let's keep this country great. Let's keep Bella Abzug out of Congress. Thank you.